Aquarius. This message is not finding you by accident. If you clicked on this, it means someone you already know has been trying to reach you without words. You may have felt it as a sudden thought. A familiar energy. A name that appears out of nowhere, then disappears just as fast. This isn't imagination. This is recognition. Before we go any deeper, take a breath, and if you're open to receiving this message, comment below "I am open." Because what's coming next isn't just about signs. It's about why they're appearing now and what's about to shift as the new year begins. Alright, Aquarius, stay with me. I'm speaking to you. Just you right now, wherever you are listening from. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. Because what you're feeling, that quiet pull, that strange sense of familiarity, it didn't come out of nowhere. This moment didn't either. You see, this time of year always does something subtle to you. As the calendar thins, as the noise softens, as the old year loosens its grip, your awareness opens. Not loudly, not dramatically, but gently, like a door you didn't even realize was there until the light started slipping through the edges. And lately, you've been noticing things. Small things, repeating things, a thought that returns when you're not looking for it. A familiar energy brushing past your awareness, a sense of recognition that doesn't come with a story, only a feeling. You might have tried to explain it away. You're good at that. You tell yourself it's coincidence, or memory, or your mind wandering late at night. But deep down, you know that's not the truth. Because this doesn't feel random, it feels personal. Aquarius, you're standing in a moment where your inner world is recalibrating, breaking, not unraveling, realigning. This is what happens when you're ready to recognize a connection rather than chase one. When your soul begins to notice before your mind asks for proof. There is an energy around you right now that feels familiar for a reason. Not because you imagined it, not because you wanted it to be there, but because some part of you has already met it before. And I don't mean in a dramatic way. Not a fantasy, not a projection. I mean in the quiet way. The way you recognize a song before you remember where you first heard it. The way a place feels known even on your first visit. The way certain eyes feel like they've already seen you. This is recognition without memory. And it tends to surface when timing finally loosens its grip. You may notice that your intuition feels sharper lately. Not louder, clearer. You sense when something is approaching without knowing what it is yet. You feel a shift before it arrives. That's not anxiety, that's alignment. Something in you has moved into a position where it can finally notice what's been circling nearby all along. And here's what matters most. This energy isn't foreign to your life. It isn't distant, it isn't unreachable. It belongs to someone already within your orbit. Someone your soul has marked as familiar, even if your conscious mind hasn't fully caught up yet. You don't need to analyze this. You don't need to name it. You don't need to decide anything right now. Just notice how your body responds when you think about being seen. Truly seen. Notice the calm beneath the curiosity. The steadiness beneath the questions. That's your signal. And as we stay here together for a moment longer, let that awareness settle. Because once you recognize the energy, the way it shows up begins to change. Alright, stay right here with me. There's something important I want to say to you. And I want you to hear it as if it's just us. No audience, no background noise. Just you and this moment. What's flowing toward you now is not a stranger. That's why it feels confusing and familiar at the same time. You're not standing at the edge of something unknown. You're standing in front of something you've already passed by, maybe more than once. This is the kind of connection that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It slips into awareness quietly. You notice it later. In hindsight, you realize there was a look that lingered a second too long. A conversation that felt unfinished even though it ended politely. A presence that stayed with you after the room was empty. You might tell yourself that it was nothing, that it didn't mean anything, but your body knew better. Aquarius, you've always had a way of sensing people before they speak, of reading the space between words, of feeling energy before intention is revealed. And this person, they exist in that space. They're not new to your world. They're already part of your environment, your routine, your orbit. Someone you cross paths with casually. Someone you interacted with briefly, someone you noticed but never fully explored. Not because you weren't curious, but because timing didn't open the door yet. There's a specific kind of familiarity here. Not comfort exactly, more like recognition without context. That strange sense of, I know you without knowing why. You may have felt it as déjà vu, a moment where time felt thin, where the present brushed up against something older. That doesn't come from imagination. It comes from memory stored deeper than thought. Some connections don't start in this lifetime, they resume. And when they do, they don't rush. They hover. They observe. They wait until both people are ready to see clearly. That's why this has taken time. Not because one of you was avoiding it, But because growth had to happen first, you've changed. They've changed. And now the version of you who can hold this connection is finally here. I want you to notice something. When you think of this person, there isn't anxiety. There isn't urgency. There's a quiet steadiness. That calm is important. It's how you know this isn't projection or fantasy. It's grounded. And grounding is your signal that this connection belongs in reality. You don't need to search for who this is. You don't need to scan faces or replay conversations. Let it reveal itself naturally. Because meant to be recognized always finds its way into clarity without force. And as this awareness settles into place, you may start noticing how the space between you and them feels different. Softer. Closer. As if something unspoken is beginning to lean forward. Just stay present with that feeling. Let it breathe. Because once recognition becomes conscious, movement follows. Alright, Aquarius, stay with me a little longer, because this is where things begin to feel subtle and personal. You might have noticed it already, not as a message, not as a clear sign, but as a pattern, something repeating, quietly, almost patiently. You wake up and the same number appears again.
On your phone, on a clock, on a receipt you weren't even paying attention to.
44, 13, 7. At first, you brush it off. You always do. You're logical. You don't like forcing meaning onto things. But then it happens again and again. And something inside you pauses. Not curiosity exactly, recognition. And then there are the thoughts. They don't arrive with a story attached. They just appear.
A face. Energy.
Of nowhere. In the middle of your day. When your mind was somewhere else entirely. You weren't looking for them. You weren't trying to remember. They just showed up. And what's interesting is how your body reacts. There's no tension. No rush. Just a quiet awareness. Aquarius, this is how energy communicates before words exist. Not through logic, not through explanation, through resonance. You might notice colors standing out more lately, a certain shade catching your eye repeatedly. A sound or a song following you from place to place. It's not loud, it's consistent, like a frequency gently tapping on the same door. This isn't coincidence, but it's also not something you need to decode. These signals aren't asking you to figure anything out, they're asking you to feel. And you are especially sensitive to this kind of communication, even when you pretend you're not. You've always been able to sense shifts before they happen, to feel changes in the air before they arrive in form. That's not imagination, that's attunement. Right now, there is someone thinking of you in moments you can't see, not obsessively, not desperately, not quietly, steadily, and that thought creates movement. Energy travels where attention goes, so when they think of you, something reaches you, not as a message, but as a feeling. That's why it lands when you least expect it. That's why it bypasses the mind entirely. And maybe you've asked yourself, why now all at once? It's because awareness is a shared experience. When one person becomes ready to acknowledge a connection, the other begins to feel it. Not because anyone is pushing, but because the distance between two frequencies has narrowed. You don't need to respond yet. You don't need to act. Just notice how these signals arrive without urgency, without pressure. That's how you know they're real. Anything meant to enter your life gently will always announce itself softly first. And as you allow yourself to stay present with these small moments, these quiet reminders, you may begin to sense something else forming. Not in your thoughts, but in the space around you. Like a conversation that hasn't started yet, but already knows how it will feel once it does. Alright, let's slow this down together, because this part matters, and I want you to hear it without judgment, without pressure, just truth. You may have wondered why nothing has happened yet, why the energy feels close, but not fully here, why something that feels so real has stayed unspoken for so long. And if I'm being honest with you, it's not because they didn't notice you. It's because they did. When someone recognizes depth, they hesitate, not out of weakness, but out of respect. This person didn't want to step towards you casually. They didn't want to enter your world halfway, unsure, unprepared, uncertain. They sensed early on that this wasn't small, and that kind of awareness can be intimidating. You see, rejection feels different when the connection matters. When it's light, you risk easily. But when something touches your core, you protect it. You pause. This person carries a quiet fear, not of you, but of losing what could be possible before it even has space to breathe. They didn't want to approach you with unfinished parts of themselves. They didn't want to offer fragments where wholeness was required. Aquarius, that's something you understand deeply. You've never been interested in shallow exchanges. You feel them immediately, and you step away just as quickly. They knew that about you. So instead of rushing forward, they stepped inward. They chose growth over immediacy, healing over impulse. Not because they weren't brave, but because they wanted to be ready. There's a difference. They weren't waiting for the perfect moment. They were becoming the version of themselves that could meet you honestly. And that takes time. Time to face old patterns. Time to release past attachments. Time to understand what commitment truly means. You may not have seen this process, but you felt it. In the pauses. In the almost moments. In the sense that something was forming behind the scenes of your awareness. And maybe part of you questioned it. Why wait? Why not speak? Why not act? But deep down, you also know this truth. Anything that lasts doesn't arrive in a rush. It arrives with intention. This person didn't want a moment with you. They want a continuity, a connection that could hold weight, that could survive change, that could grow instead of burn out. And so they waited, not passively, but deliberately. They observed, they reflected, they matured. And while that may have felt like distance, it was actually preparation. Because when someone finally steps forward after choosing readiness over speed, they don't come empty-handed. They come steady, and that steadiness is what you've been sensing underneath it all. The calm, the absence of urgency, the quiet trust that nothing has been lost, just timed. So if you felt moments of doubt, let them soften now. Nothing was delayed by mistake. Everything was aligning so that when movement begins, it feels natural, unforced, like something that always knew it would find its way to you. All right, Aquarius, let's stay here together for a moment. Because this feeling you've been carrying, the one that doesn't quite have a name, deserves space to be understood. There is a certain kind of familiarity that doesn't come from time spent together. It doesn't come from shared history or long conversations or knowing the details of someone's life. It arrives quietly. You feel it even when you barely know them, even when you've only crossed paths, even when nothing significant ever happened. And that's what makes it confusing. You might wonder how someone can feel so familiar when they are still, in many ways, a mystery. But familiarity doesn't always mean closeness. Sometimes it means recognition. You sense it in the way your energy settles around them, in the way your nervous system softens instead of tightening. There's no rush to impress, no instinct to perform, no urge to be anything other than yourself. That's rare. And when it happens, your body notices before your mind does. You may catch yourself thinking of them without a clear reason, not because you miss them, not because something reminded you. They simply appear in your awareness, in the middle of a quiet moment, during a routine day, when your attention is somewhere else entirely. And when that thought arrives, it doesn't bring chaos, it brings stillness, almost like a pause, as if something inside you says there you are without needing an explanation. That's not imagination, that's memory stored beyond logic. There are connections that don't live in the mind, they live in the deeper layers of awareness, the ones that remember patterns, energies, and emotional truth. You might have had moments where you looked at this person and felt something ancient stir, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a quiet sense of, I know you. And maybe you questioned that, tried to rationalize it away. You're good at that. But this kind of knowing doesn't come from fantasy. It comes from resonance. From a place where two frequencies recognize each other without needing context. This is what people mean when they talk about soul recognition. It isn't mystical in the way movies portray it. It's subtle, grounded. It feels natural. It feels like coming across something that already knows how to exist with you. And here's the part that matters. Soul recognition doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't ask you to chase. It doesn't create urgency. It simply invites awareness. To notice. To honor what feels true. You don't need to label this connection. You don't need to define where it's going. All you need to do is trust that the calm you feel around this energy is not accidental. Calm is the language of alignment. And when two people recognize each other at this level, movement happens naturally. Not forced. Not rushed. It unfolds when both are ready to meet from a place of honesty and presence. So if you've been sensing this familiarity, this gentle pull, this unspoken understanding, let it be what it is. You're not behind. You're not late. You're exactly where recognition becomes conscious. And as that awareness settles, you may notice something else beginning to form. Not in thought, not in words, but in the quiet space where intention starts to gather. All right, Aquarius, let's let this moment breathe. There's a reason everything feels quieter right now. Even the noise around you seems to slow down at this time of year. The streets, the conversations, your own thoughts. The year is thinning, like the air just before a deep exhale. This is always when things become clearer for you. Not because answers suddenly appear, but because what no longer belongs begins to loosen its grip. You may have noticed that lately. A natural release. Old attachments losing their weight. Connections that once felt important fading without drama. Not with anger, not with sadness, just with understanding. This is what the end of a cycle feels like when you have grown through it. There is no fight, only space, and you are standing in that space now. Aquarius, this is the season where your inner world reorganizes itself. Not loudly, not forcefully, quietly. You start to notice who still feels aligned, who still fits your frequency, who no longer requires explanation or effort to understand you. At the same time, something else is happening beyond your awareness. The person you've been sensing is also arriving at their own edge, their own pause, their own reckoning. They have been closing doors you may never see, letting go of old versions of themselves, releasing patterns that kept them comfortable but unfulfilled, and stepping away from safety. That takes courage. The kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. The kind that happens internally. They didn't move sooner because they were still becoming, just as you were. Now both of you are standing at a similar threshold, not because you planned it, but because timing is intelligence. When two people are meant to meet fully, their growth begins to synchronize. You may feel it as a gentle urgency, not pressure. More like readiness. A sense that something is aligning without effort. The new year has a way of amplifying this feeling. Not because of the calendar, but because endings create momentum. What no longer serves steps aside, and what belongs finds room to approach. This isn't about rushing forward. It's about recognizing that the space has finally opened. You don't need to push this energy toward you. It's already moving. You don't need to reach out blindly. You don't need to force clarity. Just notice how your intuition feels steadier now, less conflicted, more grounded. That's alignment. Both of you have done the internal work required to meet without fear, without projection, without expectation. And that's why this moment matters. Because when two energies arrive here together, movement becomes inevitable. Not dramatic, not chaotic, natural. Like two paths that were always meant to cross, finally sharing the same stretch of ground. You may sense that something is preparing itself. Not in words, not in plans, but in the atmosphere of your life. A quiet anticipation, a subtle shift, as if the world around you is making space for a conversation that hasn't happened yet. Stay present with that. Let it unfold in its own way. Because when timing meets readiness, connection doesn't have to announce itself. It simply arrives. All right, Aquarius. Let's stay in this space together. If you've been feeling a quiet anticipation lately, like something is moving closer without making a sound, there's a reason for that. Not everything meaningful announces itself. Some things arrive the same way truth does, softly, without urgency. When connection finally chooses to move, it rarely does so with drama. It prefers simplicity. That is how this one comes in. You may be expecting a moment that feels big, obvious, impossible to miss. But instead, it shows up as something small. A message that feels ordinary on the surface. A few words that don't try to impress. A conversation that begins as if it has already been going on somewhere else. And when it happens, you will notice the absence of tension. No racing thoughts, no doubt. Just a calm recognition. This is what alignment feels like in real life. It might arrive through a text you weren't waiting for. Simple, almost casual. Yet the moment you see it, your body responds before your mind does. A soft pause. A quiet breath. Or maybe it happens through a conversation that seems accidental. A familiar voice crossing your path at the right moment. A shared space that suddenly feels different. As if the atmosphere itself shifted slightly. You may even meet without planning to. A crossing of paths that feels unscheduled but perfectly placed. And what matters most is not how it arrives. It's how it feels once it does. Because there is no confusion here, no guessing. The sense of this is right will be immediate. Aquarius, you have spent much of your life navigating uncertainty with intelligence and independence. You've learned to read between lines. To trust yourself when things don't make sense yet. This moment is different. It doesn't ask you to analyze. It doesn't demand clarity right away. It simply meets you where you are. You will feel seen without explanation, heard without effort. And that is how you know the timing is real. There is no performance required, no strategy, no emotional labor, just presence. Connection that arrives at the right moment does not need to prove itself. It settles. And you may find yourself surprised by how natural it feels to respond. Not because you planned to, but because the space has already been prepared. Everything that needed to happen before this moment has already happened. Every pause, every delay, every quiet stretch of time, none of it was wasted. It was all creating the conditions for this kind of ease. So if you sense something approaching now, let yourself stay open, not alert, just open. You do not need to reach for it. You do not need to question its arrival. Let it come the way real things do, gently, clearly. And as this presence begins to take shape in your life, notice how your intuition grows quieter, not because it has nothing to say, but because it recognizes where it is, right where it needs to be. All right, Aquarius, let's bring this home gently, not by pushing anything forward, but by settling into where you already are. You've spent a lifetime learning how to think your way through situations, how to analyze, how to anticipate, how to protect your heart by staying one step ahead. That intelligence has served you well. But this moment is asking for something different. It isn't asking you to figure anything out. It isn't asking you to predict outcomes. It isn't asking you to decide where this is going before it arrives. What it's asking for is presence. The kind that listens without interrupting. The kind that notices without labeling. The kind that allows something to unfold without tightening around it. Right now, the most powerful thing you can do is resist the urge to overthink what you're feeling. You don't need to name it. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to explain it to yourself or anyone else. Just notice it. Notice how certain moments feel warmer than others. Notice how your body responds when something feels aligned. Notice where you soften instead of brace. Those are your cues. The signs you've been seeing aren't instructions. They're invitations. Invitations to stay open. To stay honest with yourself. To allow your emotional truth to exist without being edited by logic. Aquarius, openness doesn't mean vulnerability without boundaries. It means authenticity without armor. It means letting yourself feel without immediately managing the feeling. You don't have to chase clarity. Clarity moves towards stillness, and when you stop forcing answers, the right ones tend to surface on their own. You may notice that when you relax your mind, your intuition becomes clearer, more precise, more trustworthy. That's because intuition speaks in calm spaces, so give yourself those spaces. Quiet moments, unstructured time, gentle attention to what feels real instead of what feels urgent. You don't need to change your behavior. You don't need to prepare a response. You don't need to position yourself for anything. Just remain available. Available to connection. Available to honesty. Available to being seen as you are. And here's something important to remember. When a connection is meant to meet you, it doesn't require effort to recognize. It finds you when you're not trying to impress. When you're not performing. When you're simply being yourself. That's the version of you this energy is drawn to. Not the thinker. Not the strategist. The real one. The one who feels deeply. The one who values truth over appearances. The one who knows when something resonates without needing proof. You don't need to reach out first. You don't need to wait either. Just stay aligned with your own emotional honesty. That's the doorway. And when you're truly ready to receive, not because you're expecting something, but because you're at peace with yourself, a connection doesn't have to be summoned. It shows up naturally. At the right pace. In the right way. And often, when you least feel the need to control the outcome. So stay here. In this grounded openness. Because from this place, what belongs with you has a clear path to find you. Alright, Aquarius, before you go anywhere, stay with me for just a little longer. Because there's one last thing you need to hear tonight. If this message found you, it's not because you were searching. It's because you were ready. Ready to stop questioning your intuition. Ready to trust what you feel without needing proof. Ready to let connection arrive without forcing it into shape. That quiet recognition you've been carrying, the one that followed you through this entire story, was never meant to be explained away. It was meant to be honored. And here's the part that surprises most people. The moment you stop waiting for confirmation is often the moment life responds. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. So if something shifted inside you while listening even just a little, that matters. That's awareness waking up. Aquarius, you are not alone in this experience. There are others listening right now, feeling the same quiet pull, the same calm curiosity, the same sense that something meaningful is aligning. That's community, that's resonance. If this message spoke to you, let yourself be seen. Leave a comment below and simply say, I trust myself. And if this space feels safe to you, grounded, honest human, subscribe and stay connected. Because this journey doesn't end here. The signals will keep unfolding. The story will keep revealing itself. And the next message will arrive right when it's meant to. Until then, carry this calm with you. Trust what feels steady. And remember, when something is real, it doesn't rush, it returns. I'll be right here when it does.